According to consistent reports from several military channels, a military turning point has occurred on the Ukrainian front as the strategically important fortress of Servers has fallen, while the second key position, Minokrat, appears to be standing immediately before its fate. For more than 3 years, Servers had been regarded as one of the toughest defensive points of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donbas, but now the entire defense system there is said to have collapsed within just 1 week. At the same time, the situation in Minokrat is deteriorating dramatically, where Russian troops are currently assessed to control around 80% of the city, and approximately 500 Ukrainian soldiers are said to be trapped in an increasingly tightening pocket. While these developments are unfolding along the front, a massive escalation is simultaneously taking place away from the direct combat zones. During the night of December 10th to December 11th, Ukrainian units are said to have carried out a large-scale attack using around 350 unmanned aerial vehicles, deliberately targeting the opponent's energy infrastructure. Within just 24 hours, another escalation followed in the Black Sea after a Ukrainian drone reportedly attacked an oil tanker that, according to Russian statements, belongs to the so-called Shadow Fleet. On the ground, Russian forces are continuing their advance along almost the entire contact line. After heavy bombardments and intensive artillery preparation, they are also said to have crossed the Gachu River near Hulia on the Zaporizhia front, where reports are already speaking of urban fighting. Against this background, military observers speak of a turning point at which 2 central bastions of Ukrainian defense are breaking down almost simultaneously. The decisive question now is whether the encircled units in Minokrat will still manage to force a risky breakout, or whether the pocket will finally close, thereby ushering in a new phase of the war. Welcome to our channel. The war in Ukraine is currently recording new, particularly tense developments, even as talks and diplomatic efforts continue to run in parallel in the background. According to reports from several military channels, the military situation has intensified significantly over the past few days along numerous sections of the front. Particularly affected are the combat zones in eastern and southern Ukraine, where Russian troops are continuously increasing their pressure. The reported events indicate a simultaneous escalation on multiple levels, including intensive ground fighting, as well as the use of unmanned systems against military targets and critical infrastructure. In this context, several strategically significant locations are moving into the center of attention as they play a central role within Ukraine's defensive structure. The current situation at these points is considered decisive for the further course of the fighting and forms the backdrop for the following detailed reports on the most recent military developments. According to several military observer channels, the Russian army continued its attacks along almost the entire front line and achieved decisive advances, particularly in the area of Servers. Current reports assume that the city of Servers has fallen after Ukrainian units are said to have abandoned the position in an unusually short period of time. The defensive system there, which had been built up and maintained over a period of around 3 years, is said to have collapsed within just a few days. By the evening of December 11th, at the latest, several map and OSINT sources, including Suryak maps, confirmed that Russian forces had taken control of the last residential areas in the west of the city, while cleanup and security measures were being carried out at the same time. Video footage showed Russian soldiers raising flags at various points in the city, which analysts interpreted as a sign of complete control. A Ukrainian media officer wrote that the presence of Russian soldiers was now visible almost everywhere and that the city was virtually covered with their flags. In parallel with these developments, the situation in Minokrat continued to deteriorate. According to reports, Russian troops control around 80% of the city area there, while an estimated approximately 500 Ukrainian soldiers are located in an increasingly tightening pocket. Russian assault troops are said to have divided the area into several smaller sections, particularly along a network of ponds near the Sana coal mine, thereby separating Ukrainian units from one another and cutting them off from supply routes. As a result of intensive bombardments and massive artillery preparation, Russian units also crossed the Gachu River near Hulia on the Zaporizhia front, where urban fighting is now said to be taking place. Several reports assumed that the remaining Ukrainian forces in Minokrat could be forced within a short period of time either to attempt a breakout or to withdraw, while leaving behind heavy equipment. The significance of servers and Minokrat becomes clear above all in light of their role within Ukraine's defensive system in the east of the country. For years, servers had been regarded as one of the most important fortified positions in the Donbas, whose task was to slow the Russian advance and secure adjacent areas. Over a period of around 3 years, the city had been repeatedly expanded with a network of trenches, shelters, and prepared firing positions that functioned as part of a layered defense. The sudden collapse of this structure within just a few days is therefore assessed by observers as extraordinary. Minokrat, in turn, had a different but no less important function. The city served as a logistical and tactical hub through which several supply and movement axes of Ukrainian forces ran. In earlier phases of the conflict, fighting had repeatedly taken place there, during which control of individual city districts changed hands several times. The current reports about the division of the city area into smaller pockets tie in with experiences from earlier confrontations in which encircled formations were gradually rendered combat ineffective by cutting off resupply and coordination. Military analyses point out that in such situations, central supply depots are usually established deep inside a pocket in order to ensure an even distribution of ammunition and materiel. If part of this structure is cut off, it rapidly loses its connection to the overall system. Against this background, the current assessments are explained according to which the situation of the remaining Ukrainian forces in Minokrat is becoming increasingly critical, and earlier defensive patterns are hardly still effective. The current developments around Minokrat are assessed in the reports primarily from the perspective of military technology and operational command. Several sources point out that Russian forces are deliberately applying the principle of fragmenting large pockets by dividing an originally coherent defensive area into smaller, separate sections. This approach is aimed at drastically reducing the combat effectiveness of encircled units, as cutoff formations no longer have access to shared supply and coordination structures. Experience from earlier conflicts shows that within a fully encircled area, the supply of all units is organized through central depots located deep inside the defensive position, enabling an even distribution of ammunition provisions and medical support. If part of such an area is severed, it drops out of this system and rapidly loses its staying power. Reports from the Minokrat area indicate that exactly this scenario has occurred after Russian assault troops structured the city along natural obstacles such as ponds and industrial facilities. At the same time, it is emphasized that attempts by Ukrainian infantry groups to withdraw from the pocket toward the northwest have so far remained unsuccessful, as any larger movement outside covered positions is immediately detected. A coordinated breakout would therefore be associated with significant losses. Nevertheless, it is considered likely that the Ukrainian command will not wait until the combat effectiveness of the encircled troops is completely exhausted, but will consider a time-limited breakthrough attempt. Observers see indications of this in the increased activity of Ukrainian units north of Pops, where smaller infantry groups continue to be redeployed in order to cover possible evasive movements. These measures are interpreted as part of a last attempt to reduce pressure on the encircled forces or to enable a limited withdrawal. In parallel with the military developments at the front, international reactions to the latest escalation of the war in Ukraine are also increasing. On December 11th, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that Moscow had no aggressive intentions toward members of NATO or the European Union, and was in principle prepared to put corresponding legal guarantees in writing. At the same time, he accused Europe of being in a state of increasing militarization, and warned that Russia would respond immediately in the event of a direct confrontation. On the Western side, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg spoke out with clear words and stated that the alliance's member states could not assume lasting stability in view of the current situation. He warned that Russia could be ready within the coming years to use military force even against NATO states, and called on the allies to rapidly increase their defense spending. These statements were made in the context of security policy consultations in Europe, during which the issue of possible peace initiatives and security guarantees for Ukraine was also discussed. At the same time, diplomatic pressure from the United States is growing to achieve progress in talks on a political solution, while several European governments emphasize that any possible negotiations must not come at the expense of the security interests of Ukraine and Europe. Against this background, it becomes apparent that the military events in places such as Servers and Minocrat are having political and diplomatic repercussions far beyond the immediate combat zone. Against the backdrop of the current developments, several possible scenarios for the further course of the fighting are emerging. In the most unfavorable case, the pocket around Minocrat could close completely, forcing the remaining Ukrainian units either to capitulate or to break out under heavy losses while leaving behind heavy equipment. Such a scenario would not only mean the loss of another strategically important position, but would also weaken the ability of the Ukrainian armed forces to maintain a coherent defense along adjacent sections of the front. An alternative scenario envisages a time-limited breakthrough attempt in which some units manage to break out of the encirclement while others remain behind. In this case, parts of the troops could be saved, but the structural losses in materiel and defensive depth would be considerable. A less dramatic scenario would consist of the fighting around Minocrat dragging on further without a final decision being reached in the short term, which would, however, be accompanied by a progressive exhaustion of the encircled forces. Regardless of the specific course, all variants carry significant risks as a fall or evacuation of Minocrat could open up additional operational room for Russian forces and further increase pressure on neighboring regions. In summary, the most recent reports are condensing into a clear picture with the fall of Servers, and the critical situation in Minocrat Ukrainian defenses are at a sensitive point. The military developments of the past few days show how quickly dynamics at the front can change and what significance individual key positions have. At the same time, the international reactions make it clear that events on the ground are having immediate political and security policy effects beyond the combat zone. How the situation in Minocrat develops in the coming hours and days could be decisive in determining whether operational room for maneuver on both sides continues to shift. It therefore remains open whether there will still be an attempt at a breakthrough or whether the pocket will finally close with possible consequences for the further course of the war. If you would like to continue following these developments, subscribe to our channel, share this video, and write your assessment in the comments.